So as we've talked about cost models and the components that make up cost, now let's dive into really understanding how you would configure this and how you would put this into UCS Director. So here you're seeing a flow chart that kind of shows you the process associated with, delivering these different capabilities within the platform. So you got the cost accounting piece, which supports many different fixed overhead costs and variable resource costs associated with delivering the service. You also have the ability to be able to select which currency you want to use. Under the data collection and storage, you've got the ability to be able to do hourly metering records, so you can monitor how the charges can be monitored based on how many hours that they're actually running. You also can maintain aggregate records. In other words, you can save records and have those records be put together to be able to come up with a total cost. You can store them in a database, which allows you to be able to then sort and find out historical information. And you can also export this data for enterprise integration. So what that means is you can export the data into a accounting package and have that automatically tied to the budgeting process within the business. The flexible cost models that you have allow you to be able to set fixed costs based on policies. You can also have allocation-based policies so that you can determine, how much of utilization is given to a particular group. You can have usage-based policies to be able to, charge back based on how much the organization's actually using as opposed to just the resources that are provided. And of course, a customized mix of all these different features. And then from a reporting perspective, you've got monthly resource metering reports. You've got multiple levels of chargeback reporting capabilities, as we've seen before. And of course, that exportability tied to being able to send out invoices and all these different things via email. You can export via FTP, as well as being able to save them off to a file server. So this is kind of showing you just, again, some of those core features that you have within the accounting system. And, it's something that is obviously very useful as you're starting to look at, leveraging UCS Director as a tool to be able to run IT as a business. Now, let's take a look at the cost accounting units themselves. So you've got the one-time fixed cost. Now, this is typically going to be things like data center overhead costs. When you go and get a gym membership, they've got that one-time fixed cost. That's a profit center for the gym. Well, guess what? In this situation, you're basically charging a fixed cost to be able to get, some money back for just running the resources associated with operating the data center. That's really what this is all about. You also have an hourly virtual machine cost. Now, this can be for an active virtual machine or an inactive virtual machine, as we've talked about before. And in this situation, it's pretty straightforward. An active VM would cost different, because you're actively using resources. But an inactive one, even though it's not using CPU and memory, it's still going to be using disk, which would require that it is actually going to be consuming resources and should have a cost associated with it. The variable cost can be CPU hour, and this could be allocated, how much you're given at a particular time, how much is reserved for that particular application, or you can have it based on how much is just actually used. So you can allocate a certain amount of CPU. If you use it or not, you're still charged for it. You can dedicate a set of CPU, or you can have it based on how much CPU you use. On the memory side, same thing. You've got the ability to be able to allocate, reserve, or charge for reserved, or charge for how much is actually used from a memory perspective. And of course, the following follows true as well on the disk side. There's a lot of different currency options that you have. So if you've got a multinational organization, you can use the appropriate currency that's that you would use in your country. U.S. dollar is the default. So in order to be able to use any of the other ones that you see listed there, you would have to actually select those. Now, currency exchange rates and things like that can all be factored into this, but it does not do that by default. Last but not least, we talked a little bit about being able to take that metering data and be able to export it using FTP. When you export that, you can then take that information and you could run your own custom reporting. Maybe you've got some individuals that would actually be able to turn that into a billing system. However you would need to use it, you've got the ability to be able to get that information out of UCS Director and import it into other systems that you may have. So the cost model setup, this is how you would actually set it up within UCS Director. First thing you do is you go in and add the cost model itself. And the first thing you're going to have to do is you're going to provide a name for the cost model. You're going to provide a description, and then you're going to set this as, what type of charge it's going to be. So standard, in this case, you're going to be able to charge, the frequency associated with it, as well as, the different types of mechanisms you're going to use to be able to determine when the charge is applied. So is it going to be hourly? Is it going to be monthly? So in this case, we're going to show it as a standard cost model, and it's going to be charged hourly. We're also going to be able to then provide the resource cost. So this is where you can put in that one-time cost that we talked about before, or any other setup costs you have attributed to it. The active and inactive VM cost is also going to be applied here as well. You're going to be able to put in a compute, storage, and network-based resource costs. So here is something where you can then, factor in those particular pieces as part of the whole cost model. Again, it's just adding that information and attributing it to that particular virtual machine. Then you're going to be able to select whether or not you want to allow the budget watch feature. Now, the budget watch feature is what we talked about before when we said, it gives you the capability of creating that budget where, if you want to be able to have that budget be a hard defined number and not allow the organization to go above it, this budget watch feature will make sure that, any new virtual machine that's provisioned outside of that budgeting amount would not be allowed to go through. So it's a function that allows you to be able to make it much more strict if that's the way that your organization is going to drive that type of costing structure. So once you've actually defined it, now you need to attach it to a virtual data center. So here you're going to go in and actually attribute that cost to the virtual data center that you want to apply it to. So here we're going to select the cost model itself. We're going to attribute it to the virtual data center. We're also going to then select the required cost model assignment and click Edit. So that'll allow us to be able to get to this point where we can actually then go in and select it. So here you're going to select the cost model entry, and from there you're going to then attribute the appropriate cost model that you just configured in the previous slide where you saw how that was tied together. So this is how you would take a cost model that you define and attribute it to a specific virtual data center. So now anytime a virtual machine is provisioned within this virtual data center, you would now have this cost model tied to that process. So it'll build in that chargeback function for you. And this is showing you again that process of having that attributed to the virtual data center.